The galaxy watched with cautious hope as Earth prepared to send its finest diplomats to the Council world for decades. Rumors of war had brewed between the two civilizations, yet the leaders of Earth still believed in the fragile possibility of peace. The mission was considered the last chance to avoid an inevitable conflict, and it carried the weight of billions of lives. Every channel on Earth broadcast the departure of the envoy, as they entered sleek silver vessels that gleamed under the glow of the orbital docks. Families waved goodbye from crowded stations, their voices lost in the roar of engines and the silence of spasta. Chosen diplomats were veterans of negotiation, men and women who had secured treaties between nations. Once divided by centuries of hatred, they believed that even the coldest heart could be moved by reason and compromise. Their journey to the Galactic Council world was long and silent, the void outside filled with distant stars that looked more like watching eyes than lights of hope. As they traveled, discussions among them grew restless, for they knew the Galactic Empire had little respect for Earth, seeing its people as young, reckless, and unworthy of true partnership. Yet they clung to the thought that one bold effort could change history. The arrival at the Council world was unlike anything they had imagined. The planet was a jewel of architecture and power, its surface glittering with structures that stretched into the atmosphere. Towers of obsidian and crystal reflected the light of nearby suns, while vast rings of orbiting ships patrolled with unblinking vigilance. The envoy ships descended into a city that seemed designed to overwhelm visitors, with its scale streets stretched 4 kilometers lined with armored guards and alien citizens who stared at the humans with cold, unwelcoming eyes. The diplomats were escorted to the central chamber, a colossal hall carved from black stone and adorned with banners of the Galactic Empire. Its ceilings vanished into shadows, and the air itself seemed heavy with judgment. Hundreds of delegates from other worlds filled the seats, arranged in tiers around a great circle in the middle. The humans stepped into the circle, their robes plain compared to the extravagant garments of alien rulers, yet they carried themselves with quiet dignity. Each step they took echoed against the walls, a reminder of how small they appeared in this vast empire. They spoke first of peace. Their voices were steady, carrying promises of trade, mutual growth, and the preservation of life. Their words moved like rivers, calm and deliberate, yet the faces watching them remained still, expressionless. Some eyes narrowed, others shifted away, as if already convinced of failure. The galactic soldiers who lined the walls stood motionless, their armor polished to a mirror shine, their weapons glimmering under the pale light above. Every gesture from them radiated control and menace, and though they were silent, their presence was louder than any word. Despite the tension, the humans pressed forward with courage. They spoke of Earth's history of division and reconciliation, of countless wars that had ended in unity and understanding. They told of how humanity had risen from ashes many times before, and how peace with the Galactic Empire would not only save lives but strengthen both civilizations. For a moment, the chamber seemed to soften, as murmurs rippled through. The delegates and the diplomats allowed themselves to hope that perhaps they had reached a turning point. Yet, in the silence that followed, the weight of suspicion lingered like smoke above a dying fire. Every human in that chamber felt it, the cold stare of an empire that did not see them as equals, but as pawns to be moved or removed. The first act of the deadly drama had begun, and though the diplomats did not yet know it, their words would soon be silenced by flames. The envoys entered the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, their hearts heavy but their posture firm. Each carried the burden of billions, yet they walked with dignity, for they knew that weakness could not be shown here. The chamber was vast and cold, its stone floor polished to reflect the pale glow of suspended light orbs above, and the echoes of every footstep seemed to linger far longer than natural. The seats of alien delegates curved around them in a high circle filled with hundreds of watching eyes, some glowing, some unblinking, some narrowing with disdain. The humans stood at the center, their robes of deep blue, a symbol of Earth's unity. Though, compared to the shimmering silks and jewel-plated garments of the alien rulers, they appeared humble and almost fragile. Still, they did not waver. Their leader, a tall man with calm eyes and silver in his hair, stepped forward and began to speak. His voice carried through the chamber with clarity, his words carefully chosen to disarm suspicion and to plant seeds of trust. He spoke of peace, of cooperation, of a shared destiny that could bring prosperity to every corner of the galaxy. His tone was steady and filled with conviction. As he recounted Earth's long history of division and reconciliation, he told of wars that had once torn nations apart, and how humanity had learned to rebuild stronger and more united each time. Some Delegates listened with quiet curiosity, their heads tilting as if considering the possibility of such resilience. Others exchanged looks that hinted at doubt and dismissal, yet in the farthest tiers, a few figures nodded slowly and murmured to one another, voices hushed but not entirely hostile. The words of the human leader carried a certain weight, for they were not empty but forged from centuries of struggle and survival. Behind the leader, his fellow diplomats added their voices. Each spoke of trade routes, of technology, exchange of cultural understanding, and the preservation of life. They painted a vision of shared progress, where neither empire nor Earth would stand alone but would thrive side by side. Their words built like bricks in a fragile wall of hope, and for a fleeting moment it seemed as though that wall might stand. But as their speeches continued, the eyes of the galactic soldiers lining the chamber never softened. Their armor gleamed under the cold light, their helmets concealing whatever expressions lay beneath. They did not move, they did not blink, their weapons rested but ready, as though they awaited a silent command. The humans felt the weight of those stares pressing on their backs like invisible chains, dragging at their confidence. The leader concluded with a final plea for understanding. His voice rose with emotion, his words trembling not with fear but with the urgency of one who knew this was humanity's last chance. He promised cooperation without submission, strength without arrogance, respect without demands. And when his final words fell into silence, he bowed his head, not in surrender but in respect, waiting for the chamber to respond. For a long moment, no sound came. The chamber was filled only with the faint hum of machinery and the slow breathing of countless species watching. The humans exchanged brief glances, their faces calm but their hearts thundering within them. They had spoken with honesty and courage, and now all they could do was wait for the Empire to answer. Yet the silence was not the silence of contemplation but the silence of judgment, heavy and cold like the stillness before a storm. The air grew tighter every second, and the diplomats felt it in their bones that something dark was brewing behind the eyes of their hosts, though none dared to speak it aloud. Then the unthinkable happened. The silence that had stretched across the chamber, shattered not with words but with the sudden crackle of fire. A galactic soldier at the edge of the hall moved, first his armored hand lifting a device that sprayed streams of liquid across the polished stone floor. The diplomats froze, their words still fresh on their lips, as the smell of fuel filled the air, sharp and suffocating. Before any question could be asked, torches ignited in the hands of other soldiers, and the chamber was set ablaze. The flames erupted with terrifying speed, racing across the floor like hungry beasts, devouring everything in their path. The robes of the envoys caught fire, their fabric curling and blackening, as they tried desperately to extinguish the flames. Their voices rose into the air, no longer steady and calm, but filled with pain and horror. Their cries echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the stone walls and rising higher than any speech had moments before. The alien delegates did not move. Some watched with cold detachment, while others turned away, as if the sight was too unbearable. The soldiers formed a ring around the inferno, ensuring no escape was possible. Their weapons gleamed in the firelight, their armor reflecting the blaze as they stood like statues of cruelty. The diplomats clawed at the ground, their bodies writhing as fire consumed them. Their skin blistered, their voices cracked, their hands reaching out for help that would never come. The leader, who had spoken with such dignity, stood in the heart of the flames, his silver hair burned away, his voice still calling out, not for his own life but for mercy for his people. His final words choked in smoke and fire, his body collapsing into the inferno as the flames swallowed him whole. The chamber filled with the stench of burning flesh, a smell so thick it clung to the very air and lingered in the lungs of every witness. Some delegates whispered in horror, their voices trembling, yet no one rose to intervene. Fear or loyalty held them bound to their seats. The galactic soldiers continued their grim work, pouring more accelerant, ensuring that every envoy was reduced to ash. The fire roared louder than the cries of the dying until nothing remained but charred remnants and smoke curling toward the high shadows of the ceiling. And then silence returned. The chamber, once alive with screams, now lay heavy and quiet, broken only by the faint crackle of dying embers. The soldiers stood unmoving, their duty completed. Their eyes, hidden behind their helmets, revealed nothing of remorse or satisfaction. Only the firelight flickered across their faceless visors. The delegates shifted uneasily. Some averted their eyes, others locked their gazes upon the blackened circle where the envoys had stood moments before. A message had been delivered, though no words were spoken. The Empire had made its position clear. There would be no peace, no compromise, no recognition of Earth as an equaled beyond the walls of the chamber. Cameras, hidden and open alike, recorded everything: the flames, the screams, the collapse of Earth's envoys. Every image, every sound carried through the networks of the galaxy, racing faster than light to countless systems. Within hours, the footage would reach Earth, and with it the spark that would ignite a fire far greater than the one that had just consumed the diplomats. The humans had come in hope and left in ashes, and in their destruction the seeds of vengeance were sown. Across Earth the images arrived, carried on transmissions that cut through the void faster than any warning could have. The footage began to play on every screen in every city, first showing the diplomats stepping into the chamber, their faces calm, their robes unwrinkled, their voices filled with reason and hope. But then the fire burst across the hall, and the sound of screams filled the broadcast. The people of Earth watched in silence, at first their eyes wide, their hands frozen in mid-gesture, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. Mothers pressed their children against their chests, trying to shield them from the horror. Fathers clenched their fists until their knuckles turned white. Students in crowded schools stared at the screens, their mouths open, their teachers unable to look away. Crowds gathered in public squares, their eyes reflecting the glow of the burning diplomats as the footage replayed again and again. The smell of smoke did not reach Earth, but in every mind it was there, thick, choking, unforgettably. Nor rose like a storm. It began in whispers of disbelief and shock, but soon grew into shouts that filled the streets. People demanded answers, they demanded justice, they demanded blood. In cities across the planet massive demonstrations erupted. Millions poured into the streets, waving banners, crying out for retaliation, their voices echoing through avenues and across oceans. The unity of humanity was no longer in debate, for no one argued, no one questioned, no one defended the empire that had murdered their envoys. Governments tried at first to contain the chaos, calling for patience and investigation, but their words were drowned out by the roar of the people. The leaders of Earth soon realized there would be no waiting, no negotiation. The footage had become the fuel of fury, and there was no extinguishing it. The cries of the envoys as they burned alive played in the minds of every citizen, and those cries transformed into a single voice, demanding war. The images spread beyond Earth to the colonies on Mars, to the mining stations across the asteroid belt, to the settlements on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Everywhere, the reaction was the same: anger, grief, rage, unity. Humanity spoke as one, for the first time in history, not divided by borders, not divided by ideology, not divided by race or creed, but bound together by shared loss and burning vengeance. In the halls of power, leaders gathered. Their faces were pale, their eyes bloodshot. From sleepless nights as they replayed the footage again and again, they knew there was no choice left. The diplomats had been murdered, not in secret but in spectacle, before the eyes of the galaxy. This was not only an attack on individuals, it was an attack on the very existence of humanity as a people. When the declaration was made, it was not spoken with ceremony or hesitation. It was spoken with fire. Humanity would no longer seek peace. Humanity would no longer bow. Humanity would rise together and strike back with the full force of its anger and its will. The war had not only been declared by Earth, it had been demanded by every man, woman and child who had watched their representatives burn. The fire that consumed the diplomats had not ended in that chamber. It had crossed the stars and ignited the heart of humanity into a blaze that would not be extinguished. In that moment, there was no debate, no hesitation. The governments of Earth, who had spent centuries arguing over borders and power, now stood together, as if all differences had been burned away in the flames of the diplomats. Leaders who had once mistrusted each other now sat in the same chambers, their faces stern, their voices sharp, not with rivalry but with a single shared purpose. The attack had stripped away illusion and left only truth. Humanity was at war, and there would be no retreat. First words spoken in the assembly were not of caution but of unity. A president from one nation declared that the blood of the envoys would not be forgotten. A prime minister from another swore that their fleets would rise. A general slammed his hand upon the table and said humanity would fight not as fragments, but as one power. The declaration was carried across every network and in homes and streets and stations across the solar system. Billions heard it. Humanity was no longer divided. Humanity was a single nation. The military command of Earth was reshaped overnight. Generals, admirals and strategists from every continent pooled their knowledge and resources, creating a council unlike any that had ever existed. The factories of the world, once dedicated to commerce and convenience, turned their engines toward war. Production shifted with ruthless efficiency. Metal once destined for civilian towers was redirected into armor for ships. Energy once reserved for luxury was consumed. In the forging of weapons, the skies filled with the thunder of new vessels, rising from their cradles, their hulls gleaming with the promise of vengeance. Recruitment centers overflowed with volunteers, young men and women, lined up by the millions, eager to fight for their fallen envoys, eager to protect their families, eager to prove that humanity would not be broken. No one needed to be convinced to join the footage of the burning chamber. Was enough. Soldiers were trained at a pace never before seen. Their bodies hardened, their minds sharpened, their spirits forged into steel. Every drill, every march, every weapon they carried was not just a tool of war, but a symbol of defiance on Mars. The colonies pledged their mining fleets to the cause, turning haulers into warships. On the moons of Jupiter, engineers worked day and night building weapons of staggering power. The asteroid belt became a chain of fortresses ready to resist invasion. The unity stretched beyond Earth into every corner where humanity had planted its flag, and for the first time, those distant colonies felt not as outposts, but as brothers and sisters of the same blood. The leaders of Earth broadcast one message to the galaxy. They said humanity would rise. They said the fire that consumed their diplomats had not destroyed their spirit, but forged it stronger than ever. They said to every empire and every species that humanity would not bow to terror, nor surrender to fear. The words were not spoken with arrogance, but with the unshakable resolve of a people bound together by grief and fury. And as the fleets began to take shape, as the soldiers trained, as the weapons rolled from factories, the truth spread like a storm across the stars. Humanity was preparing not just for war. Humanity was preparing for the deadliest war it had ever fought, a war not of choice, but of survival and justice. Factories thundered day and night across the surface of Earth, and beyond the hum of industry became the heartbeat of humanity. Cities once filled with music and laughter, now pulsed with the roar of engines, the clash of metal, and the hiss of molten steel. Entire skylines were cloaked in smoke, as furnaces burned without pause, pouring their fire into the birth of warships and weapons of destruction. The rhythm of hammers and drills echoed across continents, and even from orbit one could see the glow of endless production stretching into the night. Every resource was redirected. Every mine dug deeper, every refinery worked longer, every assembly line pushed to its limits. The workers toiled without rest, driven not by orders alone but by rage and purpose. They remembered the faces of the envoys, their voices cut short, their bodies swallowed by fire, and that memory fueled their hands with tireless strength. In every bolt tightened and every beam welded, there was vengeance written into the very design. Warships rose from the shipyards like giants of steel, and flamed. Their hulls gleamed under the floodlights. Massive shadows cast upon the ground as they were lifted into the heavens. Some were built for speed, their sleek bodies cutting through the void like blades. Others were built for endurance, their heavy armor designed to withstand storms of plasma and missile fire. Each ship bore markings not of nations but of humanity itself, a flag of unity that had never before existed. A single emblem, now painted across steel, carried the message: Earth stands as one. Soldiers trained in camps that stretched for miles. Their voices rang in unison during drills, their boots pounding the ground with thunder. They carried rifles, forged from new alloys, weapons designed to pierce alien armor. Their bodies grew harder under relentless training, their minds sharpened by simulations of battles across stars. They learned not only to fight on the ground, but in the void, in zero-gravity boarding actions and planetary assaults. Every scenario was drilled into them, until instinct replaced hesitation. Orbital platforms were converted into fortresses, their guns turning outward, their shields reinforced to withstand sieges. The moons of Earth became bastions of defense. Mars became a forge world. Jupiter stations became strongholds. The asteroid belt became a wall of cannons and hidden launch sites. The solar system transformed into a fortress, a place that no enemy could approach without paying in blood. Yet, even as humanity armed itself, there was no joy in the preparation. There was only grief and fury. Every mother who sent her son to the barracks, every father who watched his daughter lift a rifle, every child who waved goodbye to a parent boarding a warship, carried the same image in their hearts, the flames that had consumed the diplomats. That image burned brighter than any star, and it gave humanity the will to endure. The leaders watched the progress with grim satisfaction. They knew the cost of what they were building. They knew that blood would be spilled in oceans, and that many would not return, but they also knew there was no alternative. The path of peace had been burned away in the council chamber. All that remained was war, and in that war humanity would unleash every weapon, Every ship, every soldier, forged from their grief and their fury. The storm was gathering, and the galaxy would soon feel its full weight. The first counterstrike came swift and merciless. The fleets of Earth had been forged in silence, but when they emerged, they filled the void with thunder. Entire armadas rose from orbit, their engines blazing trails of fire across the darkness. The ships moved with precision in massive formations that stretched farther than the eye could follow. Their hulls gleamed with markings of unity, the emblem of humanity painted boldly as if daring the galaxy to challenge their resolve. The soldiers aboard were silent as they strapped into their seats, faces hard, eyes unblinking. The memory of the burning envoys pulsed through them, stronger than fear and stronger than doubt. When the order was given, their voices erupted together, not in cheers, but in a battle cry that shook the decks like a storm. Then the ships broke formation and surged forward toward the nearest enemy stronghold. The Galactic Empire had expected hesitation. They had believed that Earth would cower, that its people would fracture and collapse under grief. Instead, they were met with fury, more intense than any they had known. The human fleet descended on a fortified outpost at the edge of Empire territory, unleashing devastation with terrifying precision. Missiles streaked through the void like comets, their explosions carving holes in enemy defenses. Lasers tore through armor plating, melting warships into drifting wreckage. The battle unfolded with chaotic beauty, the blackness of space lit by eruptions of fire and shards of metal drifting like dying stars. Human pilots maneuvered with fearless skill, weaving between enemy cannons, their fighters striking with the speed of hawks. Soldiers boarded enemy cruisers, storming their corridors with rifles, blazing their boots, pounding against steel floors as they cleared every chamber with relentless fury. In every strike, in every shot, there was vengeance. The Empire fought back with ferocity. Their warships outnumbered the human fleet. Their technology had been tested across centuries of conquest, yet they had not faced an enemy like humanity, driven by unity and grief. Sharpened into unbreakable will, the humans pressed forward with every loss, only fueling their rage. When a ship fell, another surged ahead. When soldiers were cut down, their comrades carried the fight with even greater fury. The battle raged for hours, and the void became a graveyard of wreckage. When the smoke cleared, the human fleet stood battered but victorious. The outpost that had once been a symbol of galactic dominance was nothing but shattered stone and drifting metal. The Empire had underestimated humanity, and in that mistake they had paid dearly. The message was clear. Humanity would not kneel, humanity would not be broken, humanity would strike back with a vengeance. Unmatched back on Earth, the news of the victory spread like wildfire. Screens across cities showed the burning ruins of the enemy outpost, and the cheers of humanity rose like a tidal wave. For the first time since the Diplomats had been burned alive, hope returned, not the fragile hope of peace, but the fierce hope of survival and triumph. The people wept not from sorrow but from pride, knowing that their armies had carried justice across the stars. Yet the victory was only the beginning. The Empire would respond with fury of its own, and humanity knew it. The war that had begun with fire in a chamber had now spread to the stars, and the storm was only growing stronger. The war spread like wildfire across the stars. Each battle scarred new systems and left entire worlds shrouded in smoke and debris. Planets that had once thrived with trade and culture became graveyards of shattered cities and orbiting wreckage. The void was no longer silent but filled with the echoes of conflict, missiles streaking through black skies, lasers carving through ships like blades through glass. Humanity pressed forward into territory the Empire had long considered untouchable, and every step came at a cost. Paid in blood, and steel fleets clashed in orbits of distant suns, their explosions lighting alien skies with colors of destruction. Soldiers descended on hostile planets, their boots sinking into soil that trembled under bombardment. They fought in trenches carved into ash fields. They stormed fortresses built into mountains. They battled in the corridors of space stations where gravity failed and bodies drifted silently into the void. Each encounter was brutal, each victory hard-won, each loss a wound carried deep in the hearts of survivors. The Empire answered with vengeance. Their armadas struck with overwhelming numbers, their technology refined through centuries of domination. Their war machines towered like giants, their cannons unleashed storms that tore ships into fragments. Entire human colonies were targeted with merciless precision. Stations reduced to dust, worlds set ablaze with firestorms that left nothing but blackened ruins. Billions perished. Yet humanity did not collapse. For every city destroyed, another vowed vengeance. For every soldier killed, 10 more took up the rifle. Back on Earth, the grief was unbearable. Families mourned as names of the fallen filled the broadcast's whole streets. Draped in black cloth, whole communities left silent by loss, yet within the grief there was no surrender. The memory of the diplomats burning alive remained as fuel, and every tear shed was another drop of steel poured into the resolve of humanity. People whispered, not of peace, but of justice, not of retreat, but of pushing forward until the empire paid for every crime. The soldiers carried that fire with them across the stars. They marched through ruins with eyes unblinking, their comrades falling beside them, yet their advance never faltering. They boarded enemy ships, where every corridor was painted with blood. They stormed fortresses where every stone was defended to the last breath. They learned to fight not only with weapons, but with willpower unbreakable even in the face of overwhelming force. The Empire saw in them something they had not expected, a species that refused to break, a species that grew stronger under pressure, a species that transformed grief into wrath. Every battle left scars on humanity, yet those scars became marks of strength. The fleets bore dents and burns, yet they pressed forward. The soldiers bore wounds and missing limbs, yet they returned to the front again. The leaders bore sleepless nights, their faces carved with exhaustion, yet their voices remained steady, rallying their people with promises that humanity would endure, humanity would fight, humanity would never kneel. The war had become a storm, stretching across the galaxy, entire systems swallowed in fire, entire civilizations dragged into its wake. The cost was beyond measure, the blood uncountable. Yet through it all, the humans pressed forward, driven by the memory of those who had burned alive, and by the promise that such a crime would never be forgotten, never forgiven, and never unanswered. The war became known as the deadliest humanity had ever fought, and its shadows stretched across every corner of the galaxy. The battles were written in fire upon the stars, fleets shattered into drifting wreckage, soldiers buried beneath alien soil, cities erased from maps, entire civilizations scarred forever. The cost was staggering, and yet the humans endured. Their enemies had believed they could be broken with fear, with fire, with overwhelming force, but they discovered that humanity carried within it a flame that only grew fiercer the more it was tested. Every system carried stories of sacrifice, a crusader that stood alone against an entire fleet to hold the line, long enough for civilians to escape, a regiment that fought without pause. For 7 days, in the ruins of a fallen city, their rifles never lowering until the last of them fell. A colony that gave every ship, every resource, every able hand to the war effort, knowing they would starve but refusing to betray the cause of vengeance. These stories spread across the stars, binding humanity together tighter than ever before. Each sacrifice became a banner, and each banner became a rallying cry. Humanity will never kneel. The Galactic Empire unleashed horrors to crush their spirit. Worlds were burned with chemical fire, space stations torn apart by gravitational weapons, entire oceans boiled into steam. Yet still humanity pushed forward. Every loss only hardened their resolve. Every world that fell was met with a counterattack, fiercer than the last. They struck back with weapons that had never been imagined, weapons born not from tradition but from desperate innovation. They bent science to their will, creating engines that moved faster than light, cannons that tore through entire fleets, shields that bent the laws of physics. Every battlefield became a forge, and every soldier became steel. On Earth, the faces of leaders grew pale with exhaustion, their voices hoarse from endless addresses, yet every word they spoke carried the weight of a united people. They promised their dead would be avenged. They promised their children would inherit a free world. They promised the galaxy would learn that humanity was not prey, humanity was predator, humanity was unbroken. The people believed, and belief itself became a weapon sharper than any blade. As the war raged, the galaxy trembled. Neutral civilizations watched in silence, afraid to intervene, afraid to be caught in the firestorm. Yet even they whispered that humanity was unlike any foe the Empire had faced before. They whispered that a new power had risen from the ashes of diplomats. Burned alive, they whispered that Earth would reshape the galaxy with blood and fire, and though the outcome was uncertain, though no one could yet claim victory, one truth was carved into the cosmos. Humanity had been tested in fire, and had not crumbled. Humanity had faced the greatest empire, and had not bowed. Humanity had unleashed its deadliest war, and vowed that no matter how long the conflict raged, Earth would never kneel again.